What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Engage 8 podcast. I'm your host, Zach, with my two co hosts, Josh and Mike. Today is March 7th, and we got some interesting news for you today. We're going to go over some guys who were franchise tagged, uh, some surprising cuts, and guys who actually got extended within the recent couple days. We're also going to go over our division recaps. It's going to be our second time doing that. We're going to go over the AFC and NFC South. And Josh, you want to get us started with our first segment?
I will. Our first segment, the hash mark segment here. We're going to talk about some headlines over the past week or so with a lot of cuts that were made, a lot of franchise tags, some extensions. First, we'll start with a lot of the tags. Michael Pittman, Brian Burns, Winfield, Josh Allen, the linebacker, not the quarterback, L'Jarius Sneed, and Jalen Johnson, who ended up getting an extension a couple hours ago. As far as the cuts, the Chargers cut Eric Kendricks, the Dolphins cut Jerome Baker, Broncos cut Simmons and Russell Wilson, who Russell Wilson apparently is getting some interest from Pittsburgh to maybe be their quarterback to step in. Would be an interesting fit there. Eagles cut Avante Maddox. The Bills cut Poyer and White, and they're going to lose Hyde, so they're losing three guys in their secondary who are huge for them. I'm pretty concerned about the Bills going forward, but we'll talk about that a little later. And the Seahawks cut Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs. Um, Not a ton of super surprising cuts here. Wilson was pretty expected, like I said, and he's getting a lot of interest from the Steelers. I think that would be an interesting fit, bringing a vet in there. They already have a decent supporting cast. Russell Wilson obviously struggled pretty bad in the past couple of years here with the Broncos, but maybe with a fresh start, he could do better. Like I said with the Bills, I'm really worried about their secondary as a whole. They've been so solid over the past 3, 4 years with having the two safeties, Poyer and Hyde back there, really locked in. Great chemistry between them. They had Trey White get hurt last season. They didn't have him for a while. That did hurt him. They ended up getting Rasul Douglas, which helped them out in the short term. But in the long term, they're kind of in some trouble. As far as going back to the tags, the L'Jarius Sneed is tagged, and he's most likely going to be traded. I know the Lions are pretty interested in him. I know they're also looking for a second round pick, which is kind of a steep price. As much as I would love to have L'Jarius Sneed on the Lions and sign him to a long term deal, am I willing to give up a second round pick for him? That's a question. A question to be had for sure. Josh Allen, he's going to be due for a big deal. They tagged him. He's probably worth a lot of the money for that tag. Winfield was an All Pro this year. He was really, really good. Jalen Johnson, the Bears extended him. It looked like he was maybe going to get traded after getting tagged, as they were trying to get this contract figured out for whoever knows how long. Didn't look like they were ever going to come to a deal, but then they ended up coming to a 4 year deal. So it's good for the Bears to lock him up. Burns, we'll see what the future holds there in Carolina. We'll talk about them a little bit later. But yeah, and then Michael Pittman, I think that's a good tag as well.
Yeah, honestly, I don't see any surprise tags at all. Maybe a little bit of Brian Burns, especially with how Carolina, they've been having a lot of issues with their future and a lot of coach turnover and all that. But one guy I'm really excited to see get tagged and extended, Jalen Johnson of my Chicago Bears. I believe it was a 4 year, $76 million deal, so 19 million AAV. I am a huge fan of that. It's actually less than the franchise tag itself, so that was huge in my book. And the fact that it's very front loaded, so that kind of points towards getting a rookie quarterback, maybe hinting at Caleb Williams and the fact that Fields might be getting moved soon. We don't know all the answers just yet, but that's what the signs are kind of pointing to. So I'm glad they got a nice cornerstone defensive back locked in there. L'Jarius Sneed, like you were saying, Josh, if I were you guys, I'd give up a second round pick if that's the asking price. He's a very good corner, probably top 5, 6, maybe 7 in the league. I think he would be a great add for your secondary. Josh Allen, the edge rusher, not the quarterback. He's definitely got to stay in Jacksonville if they want to have any short-term and long-term success. He's coming off 17 and a half sacks this year. He was phenomenal. And, oh, going off of the Buffalo Bills stuff, it feels like they're cutting everybody. The Tre'Davious White cut felt a little surprising to me. I'm surprised they haven't cut Von Miller yet, especially with how little he played this year and his massive cap hit. I think it was a couple years ago he signed a 5 year, $100 million deal. And last year he just hardly played. I feel like maybe they just felt like they had to keep at least one edge rusher as they're possibly losing Leonard Floyd and AJ Epinesa to free agency coming up soon. So that was the only surprising one in my book, but I am interested to see where Russell Wilson will go, as you did hint towards Pittsburgh there, Josh. So a lot of interesting moves that we've gotten over the last 48 hours or so. And I'm I'm interested to see what happens in between now and the new league year next Wednesday.
Yeah, a lot of pretty decent tags. We saw T. Higgins get tagged with the Bengals. He did have career low in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns this season. He did only play 12 games, had consecutive 1,000-yard receiving seasons coming into this year. He'll make 21 million under the tag, so it's good for the Bengals to keep their star-studded receiving duo of him and Jamar Chase. Michael Pittman being tagged is huge for the Colts. This was expected. There was really no chance the Colts would let him walk. Had 109 catches, fifth most in the NFL. He's only 26. He's a very good receiver. That was expected. And same with Jalen Johnson. Bears were not going to let him go, and now they're able to sign him to an extension. And I think that's a very good deal for the Bears to help boost their defense and secondary going into a big year for them. We saw Josh Allen get tagged as well. The Jaguars had to do that. He's probably their best player on defense, definitely. Single season sacks record was 17 and a half, had the second most in the entire NFL, only behind TJ Watt, who had 19. They had to do that to keep that defense. They need to keep some structure there. Antoine Winfield, as expected, also. Baker Mayfield is also an option for this, but he will test the market. But Antoine Winfield was phenomenal, one of the best safeties in football this season. 122 tackles, had 6 sacks, 12 pass breakups, and 3 interceptions last year. Was an all-pro for the first time in his career. Good for him. And then, like you guys touched on, L'Jarius Sneed, there's going to be a lot of teams going after him. I know the Colts have contacted the Chiefs as well. The Lions, like you said, he has been very good in his time with the Chiefs. 4 years, he's logged 10 interceptions, 40 pass breakup, 4 forced fumbles, 6.5 sacks, over 300 career tackles. He is very good, and whatever team gets him is going to get a good corner, but it will be under a pretty big contract. Uh, in terms of extensions or well, cutting, Russell Wilson getting cut was expected. We had heard a lot about it. That whole situation is still just so crazy to me. We saw the story come out that the reason we kept seeing Sean Payton yelling at him almost every week was possibly because if Russell Wilson retaliated at all, they could have cut him with under some sort of clause that would have lost him millions of dollars. So that's just the whole situation is crazy. We saw Mike Evans get extended, well deserved. He's one of the best receivers in football over the past 10, how many years, continues to turn out 1,000-yard years. One of the best receivers this generation. He's flies a little under the radar, but he is phenomenal. And then the Bills. Uh, you really could see this coming there in a very bad cap situation. They're going to really have no secondary now at this point. It's going to be interesting to see how they're able to fix this. Uh, in terms of the trade they made with the Chiefs for Patrick Mahomes a couple years ago, where they traded Patrick Mahomes, the pick that was used to take Patrick Mahomes for like 4 other picks. I think Deion Dawkins is now the only one left with Tremaine Edmonds and others leaving. So Bill's got a lot of work to do, but they still got Josh Allen at quarterback, so I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, a couple more signings here. We had Dalton Schultz signing a 3-year deal. He had a great year with the Texans this year. We'll be talking about the Texans at our recap here in a little bit. A well-deserving extension for him. He's a great piece of that offense. The Lions signed Emmanuel Mosley to another 1-year deal. They signed him off a torn ACL to a 1-year deal last season. He tears his other ACL in his first game back this year, and they signed him to another 1-year deal this spring. So we'll see how that goes. Although it's scary to sign anybody who just had back-to-back torn ACLs and has played a few downs of football in the past 2 years now, or will be going up to the 2024-2025 season. But at the end of the day, it's a 1-year deal. If it doesn't work out, you lose him next year. It's not that big of a deal. And if it does work out, because he is a pretty talented cornerback, I think he would have made this Lions defense a lot better had he not gotten hurt this season. I think it's worth it to make that deal. And then the last one here, Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu signs another 2-year deal with the Saints. So we'll be sticking with them. Saints, another team we will be talking about in a little bit here. But the Saints are just maintaining their mid roster, I should say. And they're not going to get any worse or any better, it seems, this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, based off that, not based off of, but going off your Saints point, they just seem like such a weirdly run organization. Me and a buddy of mine, we were having lunch today, and we were talking about how Ryan Pace with the Bears, he came from the Saints, and it kind of makes sense with the parallels on the poor money management and just not looking towards the future too much and giving very large contracts in terms of guaranteed money and per year just to average players at best. So it's just nice to see consistency at least. I don't think Honey Badger is worth that big of an extension. maybe a little bit less, but I mean, he did have like 4 picks for him last year. Had I think a pick six against the Patriots, but he's been all right. But something I did want to touch on last round, but kind of forgot. Mike Evans definitely deserved that extension. I believe it was 2 years, $52 million. I don't know the exact guarantees, but very much deserved it. I think he was tied for first in the league in touchdowns. He was or receiving touchdowns. He was great. He was a big part of why Baker kind of had a lot of success and will deserve a larger contract than he was currently playing on as well. And yeah, we'll get to the Buccaneers later, but those are kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, one more tag. I don't know if we mentioned Justin Matabuke had 56 combined tackles for the Ravens, 33 QB hits, 12 tackles for loss. His 33 QB hits and 13 sacks was first among all defensive tackles, so it's big for the Ravens to keep that big centerpiece of their defense intact. And then I didn't talk about Brian Burns. Panthers were kind of forced into this situation. This team is just so poorly run right now that it almost looked like he was going to walk for a second there, but he is going to stay with them. Uh, they're just in such a rough spot. It's hard to see where they'll go. Dalton Schultz, that's a nice signing for the Texans to keep him around for CJ Stroud. Nice to keep consistent weapons for your young quarterback, not a revolving door. If they can add a weapon to tank Dell, Nico Collins, and Dalton Schultz, that offense will be very scary. Their offensive line was pretty solid last season. They could also use a running back, but Devin Singletary was all right. But yeah,
All right, we'll then move on to our AFC and NFC South recaps, starting with the Tennessee Titans. Last year, 2023, they finished 7-10. This year, 2024, they finished 6-11. They fired coach Mike Vrabel this offseason following a brutal season for them. They're in a bad QB spot, and they were all season, but they put themselves in this quarterback spot. You have Tannehill, who's your guy that you've been sticking with. You go draft Malik Willis 2 years ago, a guy that was possibly going to go in the first round, falls away, all the way to the third round. You take him there. He's maybe the quarterback of the future. Then the next year you roll around, you take another quarterback who could have been in the first round, who also falls, and Will Levis. You take him, and now you have three quarterbacks that you don't know who's better than who, and you don't know what to do with them all on different timelines. You put in Levis halfway through, and he showed some promise with a bad O line. He's not afraid to take some chances. He has a really good arm. We knew that. Fairly accurate at times this season, sometimes not, but he was under pressure basically his entire rookie season. Levis has the physical traits, I think, but he just is going to need to polish his game. And when he's constantly being chased by linebackers and defensive linemen, it's going to be almost impossible for him to polish that game. So he's in a really tough situation. I wish he was in a better spot. Maybe if he would have gotten taken by, say, the Colts earlier on in that draft, maybe he would be in a better spot and would look a lot better. But instead, he falls to a team that's in a tough spot. They're going to be losing Derrick Henry this offseason, which sucks for them. And they're going to have a pretty rough roster overall next season. I'm very low on them going into next year. I feel bad for Levis because he's not going to have a better situation next year than he did this year. He's just going to have to get better over the summer and figure out a way to make himself look good, surrounded by this tough team overall with a new head coach in Callahan. But yeah, I'm just really worried about this Titans team going forward. This was a big letdown year. Not that anybody expected them to be phenomenal, but to go out there, you lose a guy who you thought was for. I mean, if you told anybody before the season it would end with Vrabel being fired, I don't think they'd believe you. And they just had the only season that they could have had where he gets fired, which is just a lot of QB dysfunction and a lot of underwhelming play for them.
Yeah, the team as a whole, they didn't really have a single consistent contributor throughout the entire year. Derrick Henry, he was up and down. D Hop, he was all right, but his production was kind of just butchered by the multiple quarterbacks and just the subpar quarterback play from them as well. Tannehill himself was bad. Levis, he showed some flashes, especially in that Miami game. He made a lot of big time throws, but a lot of inconsistencies, but he could turn into something nice in the coming years. The defense was all right at best. They weren't anything special. But with the rest of this division being what seems to be on the rise, they got to either find a way to keep up or just tear everything down, start with the foundation, and just build back all the way up and try and contend in a few years at least.
yeah, obviously not the season the Titans wanted to have. Extremely disappointing. Their offensive line was atrocious, one of the worst. They needed to get a left tackle in there, and it was unfortunate that Skoronski wasn't the left tackle of the future for them, but I think he'll be a pretty good left guard for them. I think that that's going to be important to find that left tackle. Like I did it in the mock draft last week, I think they're going to go with Joe Alt to help protect Will Levis's blind side. They gave up 64 sacks last year. Their running game was okay, but really, you have one of the best running backs in the NFL, Derrick Henry. It should have been better. Obviously, they moved on from Mike Vrabel, like you guys said. It'll be interesting to see how Brian Callahan, Bengals former offensive coordinator, will work this offense and be able to develop a young quarterback like Will Levis. Levis had promising flashes last season. Uh, he was kind of taking too many big hits, and it started to carry on throughout the year. But he showed some really nice arm talent. He's got to take the checkdowns more, and like I said, just try to stay out of harm's way. It'll look like this will finally be the season where they move on from Derrick Henry, one of the greats there in Tennessee for a long time, one of the best running backs in the NFL still. But I think the future is bright with Tyjae Spears. He looked very good in his limited time last year, and it'll be interesting to see how he does at RB1. But defensively, their secondary was also awful. Linebackers struggled. Aziz Al-Shaair was nice, but Christian Fulton as cornerback one was not the answer for them. They got a lot of holes, so it'll be interesting to see how they're able to fix them. I don't think they have any quick answers, though.
Moving on here to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They were 9-8 in 2023, 9-8 once again in 2024. They won in the wild card round against the Chargers in 2023 and ended up losing in the divisional round that season. This year they missed the playoffs. Trevor Lawrence played worse this season than he did last year, despite having better weapons and a better situation around him. The defense had a surprisingly great effort in the first half of the season. We were talking about it every week about how they look great. Despite not having a ton of talent, they were completely overplaying their expectations and keeping the Jags in it for many games. And I believe they started 6-2 this season when that defense was playing great. But then they struggled really, really badly after that halfway point and gave up a lot of points going on for the rest of the season. And that was around the same time that Trevor Lawrence started to get banged up and had an injury here and an injury there and was just playing through it for a while. So it was a lot of bad things all happening at once for them that just collapsed and tanked the season for them. Disappointing season though, after a great year last year. When you have a he was a first year quarterback last year, right? He was a rookie.
Who was?
Second year, Trevor Lawrence.
That was the second year last year.
This year was his third year.
Yeah.
Man, time is flying, man. So when you have a young quarterback like him in his second year and he goes to the divisional round and plays great, and you guys have a great second half of the season, you got to expect him to get better and the team to get better overall, and for them to have a great season this year. Not same quarterback situation, but it would be the same thing if the Lions came out this year and threw out a dud and didn't make the playoffs after the way they finished last season. But that's what the Jags did, and it was pretty disappointing overall. They had some bad losses down the stretch to the Bengals. They lost to the Titans. I know that Bengals game's when Trevor Lawrence got hurt, but still. They're gonna return a very similar roster next season. At the end of the day, they're just gonna need to have a better T-Law, and this offense is gonna have to be better overall because their defense isn't super talented. Maybe they'll be able to keep them in some games. We've seen they can play great for stretches, but at the end of the day, this team's gonna go as far as Trevor Lawrence can take them.
I completely agree. And I mean, Trevor Lawrence, he didn't take that superstar leap that we really expected him to take, especially after that 27-0 comeback in the wild card round last year and kind of going toe to toe with Mahomes until he got hurt in the divisional round as well. I mean, Mahomes got hurt, not Trevor Lawrence, but Mahomes got better for some reason. But ETN, he started out really hot, but it kind of fizzled out towards the end of the season, which is ironically parallel to the team performance. And Ridley, I think the trade at the deadline last year, I think it was worth it to just take a chance, take a flyer on a guy that he was probably just going to get cut anyways or just let walk. But he was probably the most inconsistent player I've watched throughout the entire year. That may be a little dramatic, but I mean, week one, he was absolutely dominant, looked like he was going to be a weapon for Trevor Lawrence for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And then he went like dormant for 5 weeks. Then he was dominant for a game or two. Then he went dormant again. It just felt like it was an endless cycle of him just having one, maybe two good games, and then just going silent for a month. Uh, Josh Allen, he improved a lot and put himself in a conversation with some really, really damn good edge rushers within the league. I wouldn't put him in that Myles Garrett or TJ Watt tier, but maybe in that Montez Sweat, Aiden Hutchinson tier. And I really think he's probably in the top end of that, looking to put himself even higher. Foyesade Oluokun really turned into a star. He's really found a home here in Jacksonville after just being let walk by Atlanta a few years ago. I think he had almost 180 total tackles this year, which was absolutely absurd.
Yeah, obviously, just like the Titans, extremely disappointing season for the Jags. The two teams that had maybe the biggest collapses this year are in the NFC, the Eagles had a massive collapse, and here the Jaguars had a big collapse as well. Trevor Lawrence, they continued to send him out there. He got injured in that Bengals game. on a bad ankle. Next week he goes out and hurts his shoulder. Then he has a concussion, and he kept playing through it. And I think that really hurt him, and that hurt this team as a whole. I think CJ Beathard should have got a couple more games. But even before the injuries, I really didn't think like Trevor Lawrence was having the season that I was expecting. We had saw him get the exciting acquisition of Calvin Ridley at the deadline the year before, and he was finally able to play this season, but really didn't have too much going for him. But like I said, he was hurt, so I'll give him that excuse. But I better see him ball out next year. Uh, I already don't think he was the talent that was expected, but he's got to prove something. Evan Engram was great this season, 114 catches for 963 yards. He was one of the better tight ends. Was consistent for him. Christian Kirk was very consistent for him up until he got hurt. Uh, but yeah, like I said, Calvin really disappointing season. I'd expected more from that duo. The main positive for the season, like you guys said, Josh Allen, he was phenomenal, 17 and a half sacks, had 3 different games with 3 sacks. Anton Harrison, the rookie tackle, had a very good season. That is something looking bright for them. Gave up only 5 sacks, was the highest rated pass blocker as a rookie. But this team overall, they're going to have to look to find a replacement for Calvin Ridley with the expectation that he is leaving them this season. They need to keep giving Lawrence some weapons, get a little better on the offensive line. And like you said, Josh, they were pretty good in the first half defensively, but towards the end of the season, they started to lose it. They're going to have to figure out what was the root of that. But uh, just a disappointing end.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll say about the Jags, we didn't mention Christian Kirk had a great season up until getting hurt, and that was also a big part of that fall off they
Yeah.
had in the second half. But moving on here to the Indianapolis Colts, they were 4-12-1 in 2023, 9-8 in 2024, and they had a very, very successful season, maybe the most successful season of any team that didn't make the playoffs in the NFL this season. You re-sign JT, you find out that Steichen in his first year is going to be a great coach and going to be your coach of the future, which in a season where you lose your starting quarterback in the what was it, the third or fourth game, and you have a rookie quarterback and a rookie head coach. That's a situation where the rookie head coach can end up having a tough season, and then he gets a lot of the blame. But that did not happen for Steichen. O-line improved greatly after a down year last year. They were phenomenal until last year. And then they had a tough year last year, and they came back and had a solid year this year. Anthony Richardson, in his few games, showed a lot of promise early. You lose Darius Leonard, which was always a possibility. Shaq Leonard, but then you gain a great season, Zaire Franklin, who's filling that role for them perfectly. He's a tackle monster, and the Colts are just in a really, really good spot now. The only thing that could really derail the Colts here is if Anthony Richardson just ends up not being good. That's really the only thing. They have the perfect situation for him. It's hard to imagine a better situation for a damn near rookie quarterback to walk into, how he's going to be walking into next season. And I think the Colts are going to be really, really good in the playoff team next year.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about the Colts, first thing I wrote down was Richardson was just an extremely fun player to watch when he was playing, and he showed a lot of great strides compared to his last year at Florida, based on all the pre-draft talk and concerns about his just accuracy, his ability to process stuff like that. And for the running backs, JT, I mean, he got re-signed and then he was out for the first 4 games, I think. With he was on IR with that injury or whatever. But Moss, while Taylor was out, he was good, borderline great. But when JT finally returned, he showed why he's truly a top 3 back in the league. And Pittman, he's turning into just a model of consistency, kind of reminding me of a young Mike Evans. Not necessarily going for like 1,800, 1,700 yards like a CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill, but he's getting over 100 catches. He's getting like 1,100, 1,200 yards consistently. He's just moving the chains. He's being a really, really good receiver. Borderline top 10, easily top 15. He's been phenomenal the past couple years and will be huge for Anthony Richardson for years to come. Josh Downs was better than I personally expected as a rookie. He played that slot position really well. Matt Gay, he was pretty good. He had a couple games where he made some clutch kicks. And the big shock defensively for me was the massive regression and then the eventual release of Shaq Leonard. It, Mike, I know you've talked about it a couple of times. I know I hate that he kind of just regressed and just leaned away from that superstar that he really was, the turnover machine that he was. But luckily for the Colts, Zaire Franklin kind of morphed himself into that star linebacker role. He may not be forcing like 6 fumbles a year, but he's racking up tackles. He's very involved in the run and pass game. He's a very talented individual. Steichen was excellent in his first year as a head coach. He was a coach of the year candidate, and I think he probably could have been top 2 or even won it if they made the playoffs. And for the Colts in general, things are looking up for them 100%.
Yeah, this season was a massive step in the right direction for the Colts going into the season. Like you guys said, they were 4-12-1 in 2022. They have a first-year coach, the third youngest roster, a rookie quarterback, one of the top five youngest starting quarterbacks in NFL history with Anthony Richardson, and their offensive line had played horrendous the prior year. And before the season started, nothing was looking good for them at all. Their cornerback one, Isaiah Rodgers, or cornerback two, was suspended the entire season for gambling. He was ended up getting cut. JT missed the first 4 weeks with a questionable ankle injury slash contract dispute that lasted most of the offseason. Massive distraction. Dallas Flowers was the cornerback too after Isaiah Rodgers was cut with the gambling and he tore his Achilles early in the season. We saw Grover Stewart get suspended for PEDs. Multiple other players get suspended for conduct detrimental to the team. Like you guys said, Shaquille Leonard being cut in the middle of the season after just really lost all the kind of speed he had. He looked slow, wasn't quick to the ball. Jim Irsay had some health issues, and really it just didn't seem like much was going to go right for them at all. Like you guys said, Anthony Richardson, he would deal with injuries early in the season and then would end up tearing his AC joint, season-ending injury. And with all that, they still managed to finish 9-8. And I agree with Josh. They might have had the most successful team season for any team that didn't make the playoffs. Where maybe a Tyler Goodson catch away from making the playoffs. Kenny Moore, he was very good this season after being rough last season. It was nice to see him. Same with Julian Blackmon in the secondary. But really, the offensive line's improvement from 2022 was the main factor for this team. Ryan Kelly was fantastic. Uh, Quentin Nelson was able to get back to that elite play he had. Braden Smith was great when he was healthy. Bernard Ryman had a very good step forward in his development at left tackle. A lot of things went bad for this team, but there was a lot of things that went right. Michael Pittman as well, like you guys said, over 1,100 yards. He was great. This team was missing Jelani Woods all season, a very good tight end that I think will be a stud next season. And I'm just so excited for when Anthony Richardson is able to come back and seeing Shane Steichen be able to scheme up that run game. Gardner Minshew had a great season as a backup, one of the better seasons as a backup in the NFL. Was able to bring him to a 9-8 record. It'll be interesting to see if the Colts decide to bring him back or if they go in a different direction. I think this team is going to be very good in the future. If Anthony Richardson can stay healthy and look how he was looking this season, I think this team could possibly be Super Bowl contenders if they make some nice moves in free agency and in the draft to get that secondary a little bit better and more depth and maybe one more weapon for Anthony Richardson.
All right, moving on to our final AFC South team here, the Houston Texans. 2023 they were 3-13-1. 2024 they were 10-7, won a playoff game and lost in the second round to the Baltimore Ravens. This is one of my few great predictions this season that they were going to be a good team. They were phenomenal this season. CJ Stroud was amazing. He is going to be top 10 if he's not already a top 10 quarterback in this league. He just has a rocket arm. He's super accurate. He's not afraid to take the deep shot, even though he still takes his checkdowns from time to time. He's going to go out there and air it out. In a lot of ways, he's a better version of Will Levis. But young guys like Tank Dell, Stingley, Anderson, Noah Brown all had great years for the Texans. Dalton Schultz as well, we just spoke about getting the extension. They had a lot of players, especially on the offensive end, that were just great for them overall that outplayed their expectations. This team could be super dangerous. They just need to maybe boost the O-line a little bit. Singletary was great towards the end of the year, but maybe get a bit of a run game when you can mix that run game in and then have that deep pass throughout that CJ Stroud has with those receivers like Tank Dell, who will be coming back from injury, and then Noah Brown and Yoel Schultz in there as well. I think this can just be a very deadly team. D'Amico Ryans was phenomenal in his first year. Similar to the Colts, you now know that you have your head coach of the future. And the Texans' future is very, very bright.
Yeah, I mean, building off your first point, Stroud was absolutely phenomenal for a rookie quarterback. He already is, if not just borderline top 10 quarterback in the league. The run game as a whole was kind of underwhelming in my eyes. I kind of thought Pierce would have been better, but he didn't improve in his second year the way that I hoped he would. A guy that they could really use in the offseason, Saquon. I mean, I think he might be the leading betting odds guy, or the Texans might be the odds leader, however you say that, to land Saquon. So Stroud and Saquon would be a scary duo. Nico Collins, he kind of emerged as like a low end wide receiver one throughout the entire year. He produced his best year as a pro in his third year. Tank Dell, he seems to be a great wide receiver too. I really wish I would have seen him, Stroud, and Nico kind of emerge as a phenomenal trio through the playoffs, but unfortunately, Tank Dell did get hurt towards the end of the year. And believe it or not, Noah Brown might have earned himself a nice little paycheck in this offseason coming up. Will Anderson quietly had a phenomenal rookie year as well as an edge rusher. Stingley also had a really great year, kind of on the down low, because not one player really made up million plays on the Texans defense. It was more so a team effort. D'Amico Ryans had those guys absolutely humming, and he was excellent as well within his first year as a head coach. So, like pretty much the rest of this division, aside from the Titans, the Texans are looking really good, and they can make some moves this offseason that can put them in a great spot to contend next year.
Yeah, just a phenomenal season by them. Another one of the teams that we really weren't expecting to take this big of a leap. They won the season finale against the Colts to clinch a playoff opportunity. Were able to knock off the Browns in the wild card round, a team that was hot going into the playoffs. CJ Stroud looked like one of the league's top QBs as a rookie, 4,108 yards, 23 touchdowns, only 5 picks. He was better than most people could have imagined. He was by far the rookie of the year this season, was the best rookie quarterback this season. Nico Collins and Tank Dell, like you guys said, really showed that they were a pretty good wide receiver duo. It'll be interesting to see if they're going to bring in one more receiver, if they'll stick with those two. Dalton Schultz was a very solid, just tight end to get the ball to in some short yardage or third down situations. Devin Singletary was surprisingly good for them in the second half of the season. Had one of, if not his best season as a professional. I was really excited to see Damian Pierce like you, Zach, and really did not work out for them. And like the Jets last year, they were able to sweep the offensive rookie of the year and the defensive rookie of the year with Will Anderson Jr. He had a very nice rookie season, kind of flew under the radar for most of the season, but the defense was much improved from last year. With Will Anderson, D'Amico Ryans is a phenomenal head coach, was able to build a very good culture, it seems. Stingley was good. Jalen Petrie was here and there, but uh, this team is in a very good spot, a projected $71.5 million salary cap to go into the offseason with on top of this team that they already have. So it'll be very interesting to see what moves they make, and this team could be very good for years to come.
All right, moving on here to the NFC South. The Carolina Panthers. In 2023, they were 7-10. In 2024, they were 2-15. They fired Frank Reich mid-season. Very disappointing season from Bryce Young overall. Had virtually no offense as a team. They were punting for most of the season. It felt like every time you saw them on red zone, they were punting, or every time you saw them in game, they were punting because they never were on red zone. But the pass defense was surprisingly good this season. There was a point late in the season, I don't know what they finished as, where they were third in pass yards per game. So their pass defense was the one bright spot for them, despite having a lot of defensive injuries that just killed them overall. Having the worst team in the NFL by far and not having your first round pick is really tough. Puts the Bears in a great scenario that otherwise they would be in that purgatory that they've been in for a long time, had they not had this pick. But as another team, we speak about these teams that are in very bad spots going towards next season. And I might maybe we'll do it on one of the future episodes, or I'll make a TikTok of maybe my 5 worst teams going into next season, but they're in there for sure with the Giants that I spoke about last pod. But they're going to need Canales, their new head coach, and Bryce Young to cook next season, because if Bryce Young has another rough year, then I don't even know what you do.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, no first round pick after a year being the worst team in the league, going to my Chicago Bears, basically lucking into Caleb Williams, or at least the right to draft or trade the pick that will be Caleb Williams. But now to the team, the run game, they really just sucked. Sanders and Hubbard were not good. The O-line just didn't provide a lot of blocking or pass protection for the pass game as well. They were subpar. They really became one-dimensional because they went down really early and they just weren't able to run the ball and stay in games very well. You can't even fully evaluate Bryce Young based off this year because of how bad of a situation he was put in. The defense had some bright spots, though, like J.C. Horn when he was healthy, Brian Burns, and Derek Brown, who was clogged up the middle on some solid run stops. They had a mid-year coaching change. They fired Frank Reich. And this team, just in general, is royally screwed over for the next couple years at least, especially with having a rookie quarterback last year who just, you couldn't really evaluate him, and no first-round pick. So you gotta have to just make chicken salad out of chicken shit for the next year or two with free agency, with the draft. You got to hit a lot of home runs in your later round picks in order to really just try and stay relatively competitive in your own division, not even in the league.
Yeah, Frank Reich is a coach that has now been fired back to back regular seasons during the season. Very impressive to do. Bryce Young, very disappointing rookie season. Had a game late in the season where he showed flashes of what he can be, and then I think he responded with that game with 2 straight times being shut out. Finished the season with 2,877 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns, 10 picks, only a 33.4 QB rating. Disappointing season. This offense as a whole just wasn't good. Didn't have a run game. Miles Sanders only 432 yards and a touchdown. Chuba Hubbard was better. He almost had 1,000 yards, but Adam Thielen was really the only weapon that Bryce Young could find consistently. 1,269 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns. Hayden Hurst was okay, but he had struggles with concussions for most of the season. This team just has a lot of work to do to build around Bryce Young. They have to work on the offensive line, but at the same time, you have to get Bryce Young weapons to throw to, and it's going to be hard to work on both of that in the same offseason, especially when you don't have your own first round pick that would have been first overall. Uh, I like the hiring of Dave Canales. I think that's big. We've seen him back-to-back years with Geno Smith and then Baker Mayfield be able to fix a quarterback that has struggled throughout his career. Uh, Bryce Young is going to have to take a step forward next year. He unfortunately doesn't have the weapons that those two quarterbacks had or the offensive line. So, not a lot to look forward to if you're a Panthers fan. Hopefully, you get Bryce Young some I don't even know what to do because you have to do a lot, and then the defense is uh, at least in a better spot than the offense. But you got a lot of work to do to help Bryce Young.
Yep. Moving on here to the Atlanta Falcons. They were 7-10 in 2023, 7-10 once again in 2024. This is a team I was super excited about if Ritter could be competent because they have so much talent and skill positions on offense and defense. But Ritter could not be competent. Turned the ball over a lot this season, a lot in the red zone, struggled fumbling, struggled throwing picks. It was a tough year for him. They fired Arthur Smith and hired Raheem Morris. I really like that hire. He's a defensive-minded head coach. I think they're going to go defense in the first round, like I spoke about last pod. But I like that hire for them overall. I think that's going to lead to some wins for them. This team is exactly where they are if we had this conversation last March. They're still a quarterback away, like they were last year, but they're going to get their quarterback, it seems, this year, whether it's Justin Fields or whether they take a guy, whether they maybe trade up and try to get Jaden Daniels or Drake May, or maybe even shoot for the stars and try to get number one, try to get Caleb Williams. But they're going to have to get a quarterback overall. They can't just settle for rolling out a quarterback who they took in a late round and trying to get him to succeed. That's just not going to work. It's not a good strategy when you have all this talent around them. They built their team perfectly where you just need a quarterback. Now it's time to get that competent quarterback in before you start losing those players around them. If they didn't lose Grady Jarrett, they maybe could have made the playoffs this year. Probably would have made the playoffs, honestly. Lost some tough games late. We're definitely in a position to win the division towards the last 5, 6 weeks of the season, but then choked it away a little bit. If they go get Justin Fields, which is a high possibility, it seems like that's the most likely option right now. I think that's a good get for him. You're going to surround Justin Fields with a ton of talent, a great O line. Not going to have to force him to be a pseudo running back at all. Just have him do what he has to do. He's still dynamic. He's still a good athlete. Is he going to miss a ton of throws? Yes, but at least he's going to have a lot of guys that can bail him out. This is a very talented team with a bright future, and I still, even though they were 7-10 this season, and I was high on them going into the season, I still am high on the Falcons. I still think they can be really good next year.
Yeah, this is kind of where the NFC South got kind of fun for the majority of the year. Bijan, Pitts, Drake London, they were a really fun trio to watch when they actually got the football. But Ritter and Heineke for a little bit, they just were not good enough for a majority of the year. Young Ku, he was a top 5 kicker in the league. He has been for a little while now. He's been great from distance, great from up short. PATs, he's been pretty consistent too. Jesse Bates, I know you talked about it a lot in our division previews before the season, Josh, but Jesse Bates was a great free agent signing last offseason and should anchor this secondary for multiple years to come. And kind of alluding to my mock draft 1.0 that we did, was it last week or the week before? I don't remember. But if they go out and get a guy like Dallas Turner at pick 8, they could have really used an above average edge rusher last year to complement Grady Jarrett and Calais Campbell, where they were both really solid from the interior as pass rushers and run stoppers. Now, kind of going back to your point about the Falcons quarterback situation, Josh, I think the most likely outcome for them is maybe Kirk Cousins. They don't have to give up any crazy draft capital for him. If he hits the open market, I mean, you definitely know what you're getting in him rather than someone who has or has not hit their ceiling in Justin Fields and does have limits as a passer. But like you said, he's a very
And
dynamic
according to
runner.
Twitter, Kirk Cousins is Patrick Mahomes now. So
Wow. But
the way that
I
people are
mean,
talking about him, most coveted free agent ever, it seems like.
I wouldn't say all that, but he would be a huge get for the Falcons. He would be a major upgrade. He'd be able to disperse the ball to Bijan Pitts London, unlike quarterbacks they've had in the past. And with their new system, they're probably going to run with Raheem Morris as head coach. They will probably use Bijan Pitts London, each of their last 3 first-round picks, a lot more than what they have been used in the past. So whether it's Kirk, Fields, or hey, they trade up for a Jaden Daniels if he decides to slip past 3 or something. But I don't know. They definitely are a quarterback away, according to you, Josh. I agree with that, but they've still got to improve at a couple spots as well.
Yeah, disappointing for the Falcons considering you had all these weapons. You had one of the easiest schedules in the NFL, and you didn't really make the playoffs. They started 2-0. They looked pretty good, but then Desmond Ridder kind of lost everything he had going. He started focusing on DoorDash a little too much. Taylor Heineke wasn't able to give them better chances. Just a revolving door quarterback. They kept going back and forth, and no option was better than the other. But the talk around the Falcons offense all season was the fact that they weren't getting the ball consistently to their top weapons that they'd use first round talents on. Johnny Smith kept getting the ball over Pitts. Tyler Algier kept getting the ball over Bijan Robinson. And there was time when Drake London just wouldn't get targeted. But I think with this new coaching staff, I think those guys will get the ball more. I think they'll have a better season next year. And I'm with you, Zach. I think they might be. I'm starting to see them going for Kirk Cousins. I like the Justin Fields idea for the Falcons, but I think Kirk Cousins just brings something you're getting where with Justin Fields, it's still kind of a question mark. We saw how good Kirk Cousins was right before he got hurt. But I like the Raheem Morris hiring as head coach. We saw Jesse Bates like you said, Zach, was really good for most of the season. Second team All Pro, 6 interceptions, 89 tackles. I see this defense only getting better next year, especially with Raheem Morris. So. Even though it's a disappointing season, you still have a decently bright future for the Falcons if you can just find a quarterback.
Yeah, with just all the accolades that Kirk Cousins has had in his esteemed career.
Stop hating.
Let me highlight the main one, which was the beating the New Orleans Saints in 2019 in the wild card round. If that's what the Falcons want, that's what they want. But it's going to be funny to me when Kirk Cousins continues to just that's his biggest accolade is how much money he's made. And if you have a quarterback whose biggest accolade is their total money made, that's tough. But
I think
if
that's
that's
kind
what
of a
we're gonna,
flex.
if that's no,
Yeah, I think that's a
it's great
flex.
for him.
Yeah, that goes
It's
pretty hard.
phenomenal for him. Just seeing stuff on Twitter about like him being like the savior is just Jesus, bro was good for 8 games. But regardless, we'll move on to the Saints. 2023, 7-10, 2024, 9-8, 2019, lost to Kirk Cousins in the wild card round. The Saints, Derek Carr was Derek Carr as expected. Exactly what you expected from him. You go and get a decent quarterback, you have a decent season, with a decent roster. That's I think the word I would use to describe the Saints is they are just decent. That's all they are. They're decent everywhere. They got decent receiver. Well, I guess maybe receivers are good. Decent quarterback, decent O line, decent defense. Like they're just
Decent
an
tight
okay
end.
team. Yeah, decent tight end. Unless we're counting Taysom Hill, then maybe they're great there. But um, defense, despite lower talent, had a pretty good season overall for them. Surprisingly finished top 10 in points for and allowed this season. So they did a good job in those categories. They did decide to keep Dennis Allen. Um, Maybe if it was his call on the Falcons game at the end of the season, running that touchdown in, maybe he gets fired for that. But that was Jameis who's going to be the scapegoat for that one. Only bad loss this year was all the connections here was to Minnesota in week 10. That was the real only bad loss. I'm sure if Kirk Cousins was in that game, the Vikings would have won by 70. But overall, a middle of the pack team that had a slight improvement with a better quarterback this season. And the Saints are just overall just a really boring team to talk about.
I mean, I'm not going to use decent the way that you did, but the one that I see recurring in my notes here is meh. I mean, Carr was meh. Kamara in the run game was meh. Olave was fine, but Thomas just didn't stay healthy, so he's a meh. Rashid Shaheed was cool and fun at times. He was a good deep threat that could take the top off of defense. The Saints defense, they're getting old, but they were still kicking at times. You had times where the Honey Badger would come in, make a crazy play that you've seen him make a bunch of times in his prime. Cameron Jordan had a few of those dominant bull rushes or just maybe a ghost rush getting around the edge, sacking the quarterback. But they got to figure out the cap situation, especially since they owe Carr a lot of money coming up. And I actually saw something really crazy about Michael Thomas. I don't know who the hell like constructed this witchcraft contract of his, but according to this tweet I saw earlier today, that they're going to owe him like $119 million in bonuses and guarantees if his contract is not restructured or just flat out terminated by March 15th. I don't know how that works or how you even make it that way. Even if it's even true, I could just be talking out of my ass right now. But if that's true, how do you set that up and you just let that happen to just screw yourself over? It's absolutely insane. So Saints got to
Saints.
yeah, death taxes and the Saints and their salary cap issues. I don't know. Just mismanagement of money, sounding like a 15-year-old with mommy's credit card, just spending all of his money on 2K VC. But I don't know. They got to figure it out. But yeah, they were meh this year.
Yeah, they're like the anti-Bills. They just refuse to cut everybody and just restructure their contract. Disappointing season for the Saints in the worst division. And like I said, with the Falcons, had one of the easiest schedules and they were unable to win it. But really, the only bright spot they had was Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Both made some great plays this season. Each finished in the top 5 for second-year receivers in yardage. Derek Carr struggled early in the season, was banged up, but down the stretch, he played very good football. Led the league in touchdown passes in the final 6 weeks. He was he finished the year with the 6th best completion percentage, 10th most touchdown passes, and tied for the 3rd best interception rate. So he is mad, but he had a solid season, especially towards the end. The secondary was surprisingly solid for them. Marshawn Lattimore got injured, but Paulson Adebo stepped up. Jonathan Abram actually played very well, and so did Isaac Yadam. The issue with the Saints team is really in the trenches. Offensively, they struggle to run the football, which should be one of their strengths with Kamara and Jamal Williams. Defensively, they were unable to sack the quarterback. They were able to stop the run, but not enough sacks. 4th worst total sacks and sack rate in the NFL. I'm really shocked to see this team stick with Dennis Allen. I thought they'd move on, find a new guy, but they decided to stick with Dennis Allen. Just a meh coach.
Yeah. Last thing I want to say about Kirk Cousins here, but I got to get it
Why
off
is
my
he on your
chest.
mind so much?
I'm just, I mean, his
Unhealthy
Twitter just,
obsession.
he has made $231 million in his career. And after his projected contract this year, which will be, it's projected on Spot Track as 3 years, $118 million, he will have made $350 million in his career,
That's
which
just Big
is just
Kirko. That's what he does.
all-time finesser. He's an all-time finesser. But congratulations to him and his family. I guess they could like build a church with that. And
He consistently brings his team to the playoffs.
yeah, he consistently does. At the end of the day, though, if we're looking at his career and it's like $350 million for playoff wins, that's going to be an insane stat. But
A lot of people don't
I
make it
guess,
to the NFL as quarterbacks.
yeah, a lot of
He had
people
the
don't make.
opportunity.
A lot of people get more than 4 playoff wins with 300 under $350 million. So it's a
You
lot of
think
money.
so?
Quit playing with his name.
How many quarterbacks have more than 4 playoff wins?
How many quarterbacks have more than $350 million, bro?
That's not what I'm
Not a
no,
lot.
that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the playoff wins.
That's what I'm saying, though. With his number, 4
You
playoff wins,
said
if he has,
you said less than his number.
that's what I'm saying relative to how much he's getting paid. Like
Well,
everybody, I'm
obviously, if you're
sure,
paying
I
for
don't have
that
the
type of
numbers in front of
guy,
me, but everybody who's made that money, I would assume, has a good amount of playoff wins or at least a Super Bowl appearance or he hasn't been to the NFC
winning playoff
Championship game,
games
has
is
he?
not easy.
He hasn't been to the NFC Championship, has he?
I
No.
don't believe so.
Because it was Keenum the year that the Vikings made it, and he definitely
Right,
didn't.
that was the year before he came to Minnesota.
Yeah, so he's an all-time finesser, I guess. At the end of the day,
I wouldn't call him a finesser. He's just
I
a
think
good
he's a
quarterback.
good. I think he's a good quarterback.
You're paying for
But
solid play.
would you rather? I'll ask you this: if your team was an option to trade up and get Drake May or sign Kirk Cousins for $118 million over 3 years, are you signing Kirk Cousins or
I mean,
dropping
how
Drake?
much are you gonna have to trade up to get Drake May?
Yeah,
It's gonna be a
what's the
lot.
capital I got to give up, and how close is
I
my
mean,
roster?
Falcons have what, pick 8?
Yeah.
How much is it
But
going
I
to be from
mean,
pick 8
Probably a
to pick
first next
3?
year and my second this year. Considering
I'd say
how
almost
young
more
the
than that,
Falcons,
considering the Patriots are going to want a quarterback.
If you're the
considering
Falcons, you're gonna have
how
to pay so many guys. Are you really gonna give Kirk that much money?
considering how young the team is, especially on the offensive side, I think it might be worth it to go and trade up for Drake May. But if depends on how you view the defense too, because they're definitely not on the young side. So
Coming off an
it all
Achilles
depends on what
too.
they view their window as.
I mean, you could have said the same thing about Matt Stafford when the Rams were trading for him. You're trading for
Very
a guy
Yeah,
with
true.
no playoff wins.
100%. I think a lot of people were saying that, and he proved them wrong. So we'll see if
And so what's saying he can't?
what's saying he can't. But at the end of the day, Stafford got it done. Will Kirk Cousins? TBD. But
Maybe.
enough Kirk Cousins hating for now, all off season to do that, and plus next season. But maybe it's just the one Vikings fan on Twitter. I forget his name, but that guy.
You're letting them live rent free in your head, just one
I
guy? That's crazy.
hearing his tweets about Kirk Cousins, just it gets in my head that everyone loves him. But he's a good. I'll give him that. He's a good guy. I understand why people like him, but like as a quarterback, I'm not paying $40 million a year for him, and I can go draft somebody. I'm just not doing that. But moving on to our last team here, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 2023 8-9, lost in the wild card round. 2024 9-8, lost in the divisional round. Baker Mayfield got his second playoff win. I believe that puts him one under Kirk Cousins for his career. Had a season that no one expected, the Buccaneers. Baker had a great season with a really talented offense. They should keep him. He's another guy that's going to be highly coveted out there next season. Won't make as much money as, say, the Kirk Cousins is, but he's going to make a good amount of money, I would assume, this offseason. The defense for the Bucs played well all season. They need to be better against the pass. They were great against the run. I mean, when you got Vita Vea in there, but they need to be better against the pass. They could use an extra corner. Winfield was great. He was an All-Pro, but not a Pro Bowler. Some guys that had that. I think Amon-Ra had that. Well, I know Amon-Ra had that as well. There was a couple other guys, but team is very, very talented. I think they can continue to clean up this division if they clean up that pass defense and can retain all the good things that happened this year. We already talked about the fact they kept Mike Evans, which was a high possibility they were going to lose him, but figure out that back end a little bit, and I think they could be really, really good. Because I think the Saints are going to be pretty mid, the Panthers are going to be bad, and then if the Falcons can get themselves a good quarterback, they're going to be in a good spot too. But I like the Bucs going forward. I think this was up there. I mean, they made the playoffs, so you can't. I'm not going to put them in the category like I put the Colts of the best seasons without making the playoffs. But if we're talking about the most successful seasons, they're up there.
I completely agree. I think you could arguably call the Texans the AFC overachievers. I think the Buccaneers were the NFC overachievers. They went 9-8 in a year that a lot of major media outlets, I remember specifically, I think it was USA Today, had them at like 3-14. Baker having like a crazy high number of interceptions and all that. But he showed that he deserved to get another shot at starting in the NFL. He's going to earn himself some good money this offseason. Maybe not Kirk money, but it's going to be some good
One
money
and
for
four, by
him.
the way. I just looked it up. 1-4 in playoffs.
Jeez. Rashad White had a really solid second half of the year. Mike Evans, I talked about a little bit earlier. He was great and really earned the extension he just got. The defense was all right. Like you said, Josh, the pass defense left a lot to be desired. But in the run game and sometimes in the pass game, they made some plays. But games like that Houston Texans game, the defense kind of just left the offense out to dry while they were humming, and they just left a couple games out there. But they did win a playoff game against a much more talented roster, in my opinion. So you've always got to give them credit for that, give Baker credit for that. They're definitely slightly on the rise, maybe not as much as the Texans or Colts, kind of alluding to teams we just talked about already, but they are definitely pointing at least slightly upwards in terms of trajectory.
Yeah, it's important for them to keep Baker Mayfield. If they're not, I don't know what they're going to do at quarterback. One of the most surprising teams in the NFL this year. Definitely, I had no expectations. I don't think any of us really had a thought that they would win this division and make the playoffs. Baker Mayfield came back and had his best season as a professional. His first 4,000-yard passing season, career high 28 passing touchdowns. Dave Canales did a phenomenal job with him and his offense. Mike Evans was Mike Evans. Had a great season as always. Continues to prove he's one of, if not the best receivers of this generation. 13 touchdowns, 1,200 plus receiving yards. Rashad White was a nice kind of find for them this season. He finally was able to show how good he was in the receiving game as well as the running game. 990 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns, and 549 yards in the receiving game and 3 touchdowns there. This offense, they had a bad stretch early in the season where they went like 1-6. This team as a whole, I mean. But then they were able to figure it out, go on a run, and manage to make the playoffs. Todd Bowles did a phenomenal job. He gets a decent amount of hate. A lot of people were mad at him for the playoff debacle with the Lions. Um, was expecting him to kind of just get fired after the season. Well, if it went bad, but they obviously was the best season they pretty much could have had. Made the playoffs. He did a lot with this team. I predicted him to finish last, and he turned it around, and they were able to win their third straight division title in a playoff game against the defending conference champions. So, this Buccaneers team, as a whole, had a great season, successful.
Yep, so that about does it for our AFC and NFC South recaps, as well as Kirk Cousins pocket watching. We will be back next week to talk about the AFC and NFC West, as well as any other NFL headlines that happen between now and then. I believe the league year starts the 13th, right?
League year starts the 13th, but the legal tampering starts on the 11th, which is Monday.
Okay, so yeah, we will be recording on next Thursday
Uh,
night, so we should have a good amount of news coming out by then. I'm sure we'll finish recording, and then Kirk Cousins or whoever else gets signed immediately after we finish recording, and
yeah.
we'll miss it. But it is what it is. We should have a lot of headlines there as well as, like I said, the AFC and NFC West recaps. Until then, follow us on all of our links in the description, and we'll see everybody in the next one.